as they have removed different requirements, testing, removed the vaccinated travel lanes, demand has has grown and grown and grown and grown. Philippines is staying kind of flat. And it's the same across other ASEAN countries too. Malaysia, we're seeing this uptick. Thailand, we're also seeing this uptick. The Philippines, despite being one of the kind of earlier ones to reopen, is actually lagging behind now. And what's interesting when you look again using Google at who are these top markets, who are searching. The countries that have the top searches right now, US, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, all of these are also markets with a really strong overseas Filipino workers population. So it is hard, of course, from a Google search, you can't say, hey, I'm an OFW. But you can kind of guess by these destinations that are searching to come back to the Philippines. You can kind of join the dots and say, well, do you know what? These are quite likely actually to be overseas Filipinos rather than necessarily leisure tourists from Saudi Arabia all searching to come to the Philippines. I don't think so. So again, there are some markets, maybe Australia, that might be a more of a leisure market there. Japan as well. There is some interest, but it's a lot lower. And I think that's kind of interesting that, the demand is so much reliant on the overseas Filipino market to come into the country. And of course, those travelers have different trends to, say, a pure leisure traveler, more likely to stay with friends and family, for example, which then cuts out the hotel spend. But what I would say is that domestic travel demand is still high. So again, let's look at Google and what's happening. And these are searches for accommodation. And you can see that from the beginning of the year, and it's just 2022, it starts to increase. The peak that you can really see in April is, of course, Easter, Holy Week, which was, we saw even overcapacity, didn't we, at Boracay Island? There was really a huge travel surge. And I think that's also down to the fact that last year was hugely restricted in the Philippines. Domestic travel couldn't really take place for much of the year. Therefore, there has been all of this pent-up domestic demand, and people do want to travel, and that's strong. And although it is, dipping down a little bit towards July, it's still strong, and I would say still stronger right now than that kind of inbound. So that's encouraging. And looking at where are these top search places, I mean, these are probably not a surprise to you if you're reading them anyway. Boracay, Manila, Baguio, Paranaque, Cebu City. So a lot of the really, except Manila, a lot of the leisure destinations are these top destinations that are being searched for accommodation. A couple of closer to home ones to Manila as well, Tagaytay. So there is that kind of pent-up demand that is definitely happening for the domestic market. We also wanted to show, how does the Philippines then benchmark versus ASEAN right now? And SiteMinder has a really great hotel index, and they show the split between domestic and international travelers. So you can see here for the Philippines, if you're looking towards July, the hotel bookings there are still predominantly domestic. The purple color there is international. The green color is domestic. We're still talking 60% or more are domestic bookings. Let's compare this to Thailand. You can see a really big change there, right? It's almost the opposite. Here, about 60% are international bookings. Domestic is taking a bit of a back seat. And that really shows that domestic tourism, international tourism in Thailand, is picking up. Let's look a bit further. And again, they have this, what they call their guest horizon. So looking forwards over the next 6-7 months. What does the split look like here between domestic and international? And here it's a bit healthier, I would say. Even, look at January 2023, it's almost just over 25% only a domestic and the rest are international. Now, again, I want to say a word of warning in that, in general, we know that domestic markets are shorter bookers. They have a lot shorter booking windows than international travelers. So that could well be skewing the data, as we're looking towards the end of the year, where international travelers are already booking the long haul markets, and domestic tend to be a bit more short term. But that's looking a lot healthier, even if we're looking at August, and that's not too far out, right? We're about 50-50 between international and domestic. So that is encouraging. That means that things are picking up. Again, let's benchmark this against Thailand. What's happening with Thailand? You can see here, right? The purple is international travelers. It's almost entirely dominated by international travelers. Now, again, Thailand has a few other things going on. Consumer confidence is not great there as well. Thai travelers also tend to be a little bit cautious. And of course, COVID cases are picking up. So that all factors in to play as well. But you can see, February 2023, there's like a tiny, there's about 5% right now are domestic bookings. Again, it's to do with this short term, long term. But even if we're looking at August, which is of course, European school holidays, Europe, a really key source market going into Thailand. International bookings dominate right now for Thailand. And again, just to compare, this is the Philippines, this is Thailand. You can just see that Thailand is really seeing this, I wouldn't say surge of international travelers, because it's perhaps a surge this year, but compared to 2019, it's just a drop in the bucket. But it is seeing international travelers come back, and to a greater extent, really, than the Philippines has. Looking at aviation, what's happening with aviation right now in the Philippines? Is that starting to recover? Well, yes, at least in terms of domestic pre-pandemic levels. And we have seen the three main airlines in the Philippines. So Cebu Pacific actually hit its domestic capacity for pre-pandemic back, I think, in April. In first week of July, they'd already reached 109%. So they're now above their pre-pandemic levels. They're targeting, 16 million passengers this year. That's 5 times the numbers in 2021. And they're also hoping to, hire back their pre-pandemic workforce as well by early 2023. Philippine Airlines have almost, they said, reached their pre-pandemic domestic capacity levels. Their international capacity is at 60%. They said their long haul has reached around 80% of that pre-pandemic capacity, still waiting for China. And they need China to really hit back on that 100%. And if we look at AirAsia Philippines, again, they're targeting to get their 70% of pre-pandemic international capacity by Q4. And they're even talking about adding on routes to the Middle East, even longer haul, which is kind of an interesting move as well, and would compete with Cebu Pacific, whereas before they were a lot more ASEAN focused. So overall, we can see that the airlines are starting to recover. Again, there's that caveat, capacity doesn't mean passengers carried, right? Capacity just means that they're adding back the flights, they're adding back the seats. Whether those planes are actually flying full is a completely different question. And in fact, Cebu Pacific in Q1 this year actually made a bigger loss than it did in Q4 last year, because it's been adding back that additional capacity. And again, just because you're adding the capacity doesn't mean that you're going to be profitable either. Airlines have really got to have this careful balance between adding back capacity and trying to make profitable air routes. And that all plays into, flight availability, which obviously impacts the rate of tourism recovery into the Philippines and the rate of domestic tourism recovery too. So, can we look at what has happened in some other markets in last year to kind of predict where the top source markets could be for the Philippines for the rest of the year? So what we've done is had a look at 2 key leisure destinations really that were open in 2021, and that's the Maldives and that's Turkey, and looking to see who were the top source markets during 2021 to get an idea of which travelers are still really traveling. And there are a few really common ones that come out here. So, for example, you've got countries like India, you've got countries like Germany, like France, UK, US, Russia. Now, of course, the Russia-Ukraine war, Russian tourists may not be very likely to be the ones who are coming in. But we can see that some of these other countries are, they traveled a lot last year. Perhaps they're likely again to travel this year. We can also have a look at what's happening over in Thailand. And so Thailand have released their January to May numbers in terms of international arrivals so far. And you can see here for Thailand, top market right now is India coming into the market. Then we've got countries like UK, Germany, again, all very familiar. We have some ASEAN countries. We've got Malaysia, we've got Singapore there. We have Australia, China a little bit still in the top 10 despite borders being closed. So to combine all of that, who could we imagine might be Philippines, potential source markets? Really, one of the key ones I think that the Philippines needs to focus on is ASEAN countries. Simply because it's short haul, there are more connections from these into the Philippines. Flights are cheaper, flights are shorter. Southeast Asian countries also have a bit of pent-up demand right now. And also some of the key European markets, Germany, UK, France. India, we have seen in other countries really becoming a more dominant arrivals market, particularly with the lack of Chinese tourists. And we'll talk about that in a little while. Australia, again, that geographical closeness. And for the Philippines, the US as well, because of those close links. Now, you notice that some countries are missing from here. So China, of course, borders are still closed. And Japan, Korea as well. Travel is starting to pick up, but it is not necessarily easy to travel from those. So potentially they could come back, but we have not seen them in great numbers so far at the beginning of this year. And, looking ahead, what can we really expect for the second half of 2022? And one of the key messages I think that I have is that really this recovery won't be smooth sailing. It's not going to be this clear, smooth curve up. There are going to be bumps along the way. And these are some of these potential disruptors to recovery. Russia-Ukraine war, inflation, manpower issues, deficit of outbound travelers versus inbound travelers, and a lack of Chinese outbound travelers. So I wanted to deep dive into some of these. The Russia-Ukraine war has obviously had really huge, far-reaching impacts on the tourism industry, not within Southeast Asia, but globally. And of course, one of these immediate effects is that there's a lack of Russian tourists, although some countries are now starting to add back in charter flights to Russia, particularly Thailand's doing that. Indonesia is talking about doing that too. But one of the main impacts that this has had is really the cost of oil. And of course, that directly impacts the airlines. So this is the jet fuel price index. And you can see, since the beginning of 2022, it has just skyrocketed. It's gone super high. Now it's on a little bit of a downturn now, but you look and see how much higher it is compared to the end of 2021. It's a massive impact. The jet fuel costs this week, you can see up versus last year, up 75%. Now that's massive for airlines to try to handle. So in the Philippines, we've seen the Civil Aeronautics Board increasing those fuel surcharge levels, all the way from level 7 up to level 11. Now, Cebu Pacific are even calling for it to be able to go up to level 20, because they say that they need to have some breathing room in terms of flying costs. And these airlines' operational costs are massively ballooning because of these oil prices. For example, to give you an idea of how much this impacts their operational costs, for Philippine Airlines, they've stated that jet fuel accounts for about 30 to 40% of its operating costs. Air Asia, 30 to 35% of its operational costs. What does this mean for airlines? What does this mean for tourism? Well, it means that airlines are going to be a lot more cautious about adding back capacity, particularly to international routes, particularly to those routes that they aren't sure are going to be profitable. And also in terms of frequencies, and of course, flight ticket prices. Right now, across many markets, we're seeing very high air ticket prices, which is going to impact on demand. And that's not just demand domestically, that's also demand coming in to Southeast Asia from overseas long-haul markets as well. Coupled with that, and again, this is related to the Russia-Ukraine war, is this cost of living increase. So in June, they reported that Philippines inflation reached 6.1%, highest since October 2018. So this again is going to impact domestic consumption. Travelers, after this initial buzz, this initial pent-up demand, are going to feel quite nervous about spending their money on, discretionary items like travel. Add to that, we have the peso, which is the weakest in 17 years versus the USD. Now, this can go both ways, right? Of course, this could be a positive thing for inbound tourism because suddenly the Philippines looks like a much more attractive destination, in terms of value that you can get. But if you put that against outbound travel, that's going to have a huge impact. A lot of countries are costed in USD when they put together the itineraries. And another impact is that airlines tend to buy their fuel in USD. Therefore, when there is this big swing in currency like that, that also impacts the prices that they are buying their jet fuel for, which impacts their operational costs. Another issue, and this is really going to be one of the key factors, I think, that will limit recovery, at least across Southeast Asia, is this lack of manpower. So I've got two different stats here. So one is the WTTC, who did this report on travel and tourism employment in millions. And this is, compare 2019 and 2021, number of tourism workers, and this is direct and indirect, which is why there's a difference in stats. It's about 1.7 million still. That's a lot of workers, 1.7 million workers difference between 2019 and 2021. Again, you can have a look at the stats from Philippine Statistics Authority. There's big differences there as well, 2019 to 2020, 2020 to 21. Things are starting to increase, but there's this gap, and how fast that gap can be filled is really going to impact on the rate of recovery for the country, because if an airline is expanding, you need aviation workers. Aviation workers are not always easy to get. Some of them can be skilled, some of them need security clearance to be able to go in those certain parts of the airport. That all takes time, and until you have that in place, you can't really rocket up the arrivals that come in. Another impact is a potential deficit, really, if we're looking at the inbound tourism industry, hotels in the Philippines. What you could see in the coming months is really this deficit of outbound versus inbound tourists. And what I mean by that is, yes, we have had some healthy domestic demand, but as outbound travel is still permitted, is still open, we may see more Filipinos traveling out from the Philippines. If we're still seeing this weak demand into the Philippines for inbound, the gap actually becomes bigger between what it was previously. Previously, people could only travel in the Philippines. You had that kind of captive market. But if they can then go out, but you're not getting enough people in, you're getting that gap. And you can see here, again, this is Google Destination Insights. You can see that interest from the Philippines to travel outbound is still huge. It's still really increasing. It's staying very, very high. It's very, very strong, which is great if you're in the outbound industry. If you're in the inbound industry, you're running a hotel in a leisure destination, you might have some cause for concern unless inbound arrivals start to pick up into the Philippines. The other headwind is, of course, this lack of Chinese travelers. China has huge impact in Southeast Asia in terms of tourism. So 2019, it accounted for about 1/5 of all arrivals into Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. And that's mirrored in the Philippines. In 2019, it accounted for about 21%. Again, 1 in 5 travelers were from China. And when you turn that tap off, it's very hard to find alternative source markets. Now, it's very hard to predict China, and there have been some more positive signs coming out that they could open up. I don't want to put a timeline on it, but you know, the local media there have been presenting things a little bit more positively. They've been cutting quarantine down, but there's still no clear timeline. And, you know, I think it's safe to assume that really this won't be until 2023 we're going to see significant volumes of outbound travelers. There's still going to be that lack. So what we have seen across the region in Southeast Asia are markets looking at destinations like India as a key source market and really starting to put resources there. We're starting to see airlines opening up more flights between India and their countries just to really try and entice some Indian travelers who they're seeing as kind of the next China to come in. I wanted to quickly run through a few potential scenarios that how the second half could play out, you know, given all of these factors. So the first scenario, and I think that this is quite unlikely, touch wood, I hope, you know, yes, we might see COVID cases rising in the Philippines and globally, but I don't feel like we are going to see such mass border closures, such restrictions on movement that we have seen previously. Governments know that economies just can't withstand that. They also know that closing the borders doesn't stop the virus. We've seen that. But if this did come to happen, tourism would be hit so hard. They are just rebuilding. They have no reserves now. You know, tourism stakeholders would, many of them, I think, would be wiped out by another really mass blanket ban on travel. Second scenario, this could be a possibility, and we're starting to see hints of this. You know, COVID cases rising. Maybe borders then being partially restricted. Again, we might see it being restricted to certain countries or having additional requirements. So right now we know the Philippines will let in boosted travelers if without testing. Perhaps they would make it only boosted travelers, perhaps, who would be allowed in. Or maybe you have to have a second booster shot to be able to come in, or there will be other booster differentiated measures implemented. That could happen. And of course, that would impact on inbound tourism, but domestic tourism would remain strong because, again, you've got that captive market. Third scenario, you know, COVID cases rising, hopefully hospitalization rates remaining low because of vaccination, borders remaining open. And I think what we will see is just really this gradual increase in inbound tourism, whereas outbound tourism, domestic tourism are going to remain strong. They're going to recover at a faster pace, I think, than inbound tourism, at least for the second half of this year. And I wanted to kind of end looking at, obviously, the last week or so, headlines have really been dominated by airport chaos. You know, we've seen Heathrow, long lines, hundreds, thousands of flights needing to be cancelled. Do I think that this is going to happen here in Southeast Asia or in the Philippines? It's a little bit hard to say. I think that these countries are a lot further ahead in this recovery kind of scale than Southeast Asia is right now. Of course, they opened on a lot larger scale last year, but I think no. I think just the rate at which capacity is being added back in is a lot slower, and therefore it's a bit more sustainable. That then gives the tourism industry time to be able to put in place extra workers that we need, right? It's all down to manpower crunches as well. So I don't anticipate that will happen, but it could be a possibility. So overall, to wrap it up, can we be hopeful for the Philippines for the rest of 2022? And I would say, yes, I think we can. We have seen really encouraging signs, particularly for domestic tourism, that it's remaining strong, that it's growing. Airlines clearly believe that. They're adding back domestic capacity. They're there at that level, and they're adding back their international capacity. But what we really need to see, I think, is a more concerted effort. There is so much competition right now amongst international destinations for inbound tourists that Philippines really needs to ramp up its tourism. It needs to start thinking, how can it be creative? How can it get the attention of other source markets to say, hey, we're open, it isn't that difficult to come in, and you can have a wonderful time. That's what really needs to happen for inbound tourism to start picking up. Yes, we are going to face headwinds at the end part of this year, but you know, compared to what we have already experienced the last 2 years, right, with tourism pretty much at a standstill, at zero, I do feel that we have already hit rock bottom, right? The only way I think is really up from here. But it's certainly those tourism stakeholders who are doing things in a smart way, in a clever way, who are, emphasizing the openness, the ease of visiting the Philippines, are going to be the successful ones. So with that, I'd like to wrap up. As a reminder to you, I produce a weekly report every Sunday. You can sign up for it here, peranderson.com/coronavirus. And that has impacts which track across Southeast Asia, not just the Philippines, but recovery in 9 ASEAN countries, so you can really get a feel for what's going on in the market. So go check that out. And I thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
If you have your questions ready, I mean, there's a tremendous amount of data and analytics that that Hannah's put through. So she'll be coming on soon, so she can take questions. Excuse me. So, hi, Hannah.
Hello, hi Meryl, hi everybody.
Always a wealth of information and analytics from you. Really amazing. I think I'll lead off with a comment and a question. I think the key is going to be capacity for tourism in the Philippines, and I think certainly what's being played out here that I've seen certainly in Manila and here is going to be the lack of manpower. A lot of the big branded hotels in Manila still cannot open fully their food and beverage restaurants, even if there's demand, simply because there's no staff. And the other month I was here, I was talking to the owner of one of the big Cebu chain of restaurants, and he mentioned that he's looking for staff. And I said, are you looking for cooks or whatever? He said, no, he's looking for everybody. Accounting, sales, service staff, and culinary. So I think that's certainly, your statistic that showed that this year versus 2019, we're 42% lower in manpower. I mean, that's huge, right? So anyways, just a comment. Okay. But let's open it up to the audience. I'm sure they have some questions. Ladies, gentlemen, go ahead.
Is there any questions?
Come on. No, okay. I was thinking about scenarios, right? You tell me where this plays out. First, the increase in surcharge, 75% over 2019. No wonder the fares are so expensive. I think we're paying now for us to go from Manila to Cebu. Used to be like 6,000 pesos. Now it's about 12 to 15,000 pesos. But the flights are full. So now we know where it's going. It's going not so much to their profits, but it's paying for the gas. Here's a scenario as an option. Assuming that domestic tourism is going to be up, but capacity is going to be a bit stunted, and outbound is growing, right? And with a lack of manpower, if you combine all of those three, then really the hotel capacity and restaurant capacity we're seeing now is really going to be flat. Just because I can't see the labor situation improving over the next 6 months. And I think in terms of the hotels, I know Boracay is literally doing pretty well, but in terms of the other destinations, like Mactan has really gotten clobbered because of the typhoon in December, and a lot of hotels are going through renovations there as well. So it could be that, do you think that the existing traffic that we're seeing now in July and August will really be flat until maybe December, which is the traditional domestic tourism month?
I think there is that possibility. And if you look at what's happening kind of region-wide, cost of living is increasing everywhere, right? Inflation is at one of the highest levels in the Philippines that it has been for a while. All of this is going to combine to perhaps limit that domestic demand. People are going to be a little bit more cautious. And I think what we have seen is, this initial pent-up burst of demand. And of course, that makes sense. Most of last year, Filipinos couldn't travel anywhere. Now they can, and they can start traveling, and so they're doing that. But at a certain point, I think people start to question: is this something that I can really afford to pay, or am I better to kind of save this up for later, and maybe saving this up towards an outbound trip, or saving this up towards kind of a year-end holiday? So I think it is. You're right. Manpower is a massive issue, and that's going to be super tricky for hotels to try to navigate. They might be seeing some demand now. They might be trying to want to capitalize on that, but the thing is, they're then held back because they can't open up all of their rooms because they don't have the manpower to do that. And will that demand still be there a little bit later on? It's hard to say. With the kind of the global economic situation that's happening right now.
I was really impressed by the India outbound market, that it, certainly for the Maldives, which is a high-end destination, and also Thailand, which is very much like the Philippines. So, and considering that they really got clobbered, 2 years ago with COVID and everything, that's really quite striking that it's a huge market, certainly in population, but certainly in outbound. So, question, where do you see Philippines as a destination? Are we still very much of a budget destination in terms of international travelers?
Well, that's a great question. I think so. I mean, certainly, we all know, me and you guys sitting in the room, that there are plenty of very high-end resorts and hotels, and you can have that luxury experience and you can have that budget experience as well. But I think what I feel is kind of overall lacking is just awareness in general, I think, about the Philippines right now, and awareness that it is open and that it is relatively, easy to come in. There aren't very many requirements. I just feel like there hasn't been that concerted effort. I mean, and of course, if you compare it to someone like Thailand, I mean, the TAT are in the Tourism Authority of Thailand are in a class of their own, right? They are a PR machine. For good or for bad. They often put out policies, that will never come into fruition. But they are constantly in the press, generating things, going, bringing people in to view the country, coming up with interesting kind of campaigns. And I feel like Philippines tourism is not quite there. I think there is so much to capitalize on, but it needs to bring that awareness up, because competition is really fierce right now in Southeast Asia. So many countries are reopened. Everybody is reopened. And so for you to be able to attract those international tourists in, you need to be out and shouting really loudly against the crowd, hey, this is open, or this is what has changed, and we're safe, and we're easy to come and visit. So come. And I feel that is not quite in place.
For the China outbound market, do you think eventually when they do open up, there's going to be this revenge travel, that they'll really go out en masse back and flood out the other Asian countries like ourselves?
I mean, that's what we all hope for, right? And, if you look at the absolute numbers, it's huge. So even if it was, I don't know, at 50% of those previous levels, that's still going to have a massive impact on tourism into the region right now. I think, in all likelihood, we're going to see this gradual return. I mean, I think that China has done a very good job at trying to keep tourists within China, and they have really, I think, boosted domestic tourism campaigns. So there's that layer on it. And then there's another layer that, Chinese travelers are very sophisticated in what they want. They have a whole very sophisticated kind of technology infrastructure around tourism as well. And I think that if tourism stakeholders haven't been following that from afar, you're going to have to play catch up. So when the borders open, yes, inevitably there will be, Chinese tourists who've been dreaming of going to the Philippines or dreaming of going to Thailand. But to really try and get in those significant volumes, tourism boards need to educate tourism stakeholders in the Philippines or across ASEAN what those Chinese travelers are actually going to be looking for, what trends have changed, what technology do you need to have in place, WeChat and Alipay and all of these things are really going to be very crucial to Chinese consumers. And so it's tough because tourism stakeholders here need to be kind of China ready, but without knowing when they're actually going to come back. So it's that gamble. I mean, they will, of course, I'm sure at some point, but it's just when, and it's how many resources do you put into getting ready for it, whilst at the same time trying to look at other markets. Like you said, like India is a massive market coming up, right? So is it worth, instead, we know Indian travelers are already traveling. They were traveling even in 2021, even in 2020. Is our budget's better spent on trying to attract the Indian market, perhaps, rather than the Chinese market? There's a lot of question marks, I think, right now around who to target.
Thanks, Hannah. Now there's a question, I think, from the virtual.
There's a question from Jerome de la Fuente. However, DOT has to come up with a program. What is the new DOT secretary going to present for the last half of 2022?
Sorry, what were the OTAs going to do for the last half of 2022? Was that?
Department of Tourism.
Okay. I mean, I think when it comes to OTAs, you're right that they are also a key part of generating that demand, right? Because they are the ones who have budgets to have bigger campaigns. And what we have certainly seen in other markets like Thailand or even in Singapore is a tie-up between tourism boards with these different OTAs as well. So for example, even in Thailand, the TAT is teaming up with Airbnb, and they're creating this whole campaign around digital nomads, and highlighting properties that are suitable for digital nomads, a mini site which has the kind of legal information, the visa information, like can you really do it? So there needs to be, I think, some deep collaborations with OTAs in terms of that education. But it needs to also be quite tactical, and it needs to make sure that you're not overlooking your own market. And certainly, I think in some markets, even in Malaysia, for example, where I am, the tourism ministry is choosing to go with a kind of a foreign platform, perhaps rather than a locally developed one, which I always find is quite an interesting choice, because you want to support your own tourism industry, and therefore they're giving those commissions overseas. So there needs to be this kind of trade-off, I think, between trying to support the local tourism stakeholders, but also acknowledging that OTAs overseas are just like this massive source of inspiration and source of booking for those overseas markets as well.
Thank you.
Hi, Miss Hannah. Good morning. I'm from Zen Hospitality Solutions. We're actually one of the software providers here in the Philippines and throughout Southeast Asia. So my question is, you've mentioned that there's a problem and there's a gap in manpower for the hospitality industry here in the Philippines. And that's one of the factors that affects the recovery phase here in the country. Now, my question is, did we try considering the data against the hotels that are already digitalized or already using softwares versus those that are using the traditional way of operations? And my next question would be, do you think this is the best time for the hotels as well to dive into the digital world, or to use the hotel softwares already for us to supply or bridge the gap of having a problem with manpower? Thank you.
Thanks. That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, and I really, you made a great point there that, hospitality industry is struggling with the lack of manpower, but, many are still operating on these really traditional systems. And I think you are right. Now is the time for hotels to start investing into digitalizing those systems. And there are certainly software solutions that can help to do things like configure the best order for you to do your housekeeping, for example, or to streamline your reservation processes. So I think hotels need to be smart, and they need to be looking at where the gaps are in their operations, and what could be digitalized, and starting to try to make those moves. Because of course, digitalization will help a little bit with the manpower. I mean, you're always going to need manpower, right? You're always going to need a person to physically go and clean the room. People want, the receptionist, the concierge. They want a physical person, not necessarily, just a tablet, I think. But certainly it can help with that, and it can streamline that, particularly in this time when, hotels are so busy, they are so stretched, staff are doing multiple jobs. But I would just say that, there has to be proper training, I think, for the employees to use it. It has to be something not just from top down, that hotel management have just said, yes, this is a great system, let's implement that. Because if you're not giving the training to those frontline staff or the back office staff who are using this system, then it's kind of not useless, but almost a waste of money as well. You need to really ensure that there is a buy-in from them, for them to understand, actually, this is helping me to do my job better and more efficiently and less work for me. But yeah, great question.
We'll take one more question. Yes, sir.
There's another question from Franz Alvin Pahinag. Rate of placing concrete in forms, temperature of the concrete, and weight or density of the concrete.
I'll just ask the question. Is there any change in
Sure.
travel behavior, like how people decide to travel? Do they travel individually, by family, by groups? Do they decide split second, a few days, a few weeks, months? Is there any change in travel behavior, so the hotels can actually forecast or maybe come up with promotions to cater to the change in travel behavior?
Yeah, another really good question. And I think that there has been a shift. And what's difficult to know is this shift just a short-term thing? Or is this, going to be the shift that, happens in the medium to long term? But I think certainly we have seen, particularly with domestic travelers, that they are there is a lot of a shorter booking window now. I think there is that nervousness, around cancellation policies, that nervousness around, will my flight be cancelled? Will I catch COVID and I have to cancel? There's so many uncertainties that definitely we're seeing these short-term booking windows, which is, I know, really difficult for hotels to manage in terms of, again, manpower. How do you predict that? It's quite tricky. I think we're also seeing, and I think that this could continue. Meryl, you were talking earlier about how domestic flights are really increasing in terms of price. And, I recorded this presentation on Wednesday, and already I saw, I think later that day, that they had raised the level again. Right? I think it's level 12 now from level 11. So I think we are also going to see a lot of closer to home tourism. So I think people are going to want to get out, but perhaps they're going to be traveling there by car instead, perhaps rather than necessarily jumping on a flight because flights aren't available or because they're too expensive. So certainly I think those destinations that are closer to Metro Manila, closer to Cebu City, to the major metropolises, are going to do quite well as well. And group travel, there is some, inevitably, for outbound travel, I am still seeing people are traveling in groups, but I do get the feeling that it is FITs, it is family groups that are traveling more in domestic. So there has been a shift. I mean, I would love to go into all of the different shifts, but I think we don't have time. But those are some of them, right? So shorter booking windows, closer destinations, and smaller groups, I think.
Thank you very much, Hannah. And as always, outstanding resource.
I have one more
Sorry.
last
sorry.
question, if I may.
Yes.
Good morning. Do you think the Philippine government is doing enough to promote the Philippines as a brand? I'm also particularly making special mention of the slogan that we presently have. It's more fun in the Philippines, and now it's like fun awaits you in the Philippines or something like that. Do you think that really truly represents the Philippines? And what more can our government do to support the private sector?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the question that all private stakeholders want. And I think this isn't just the Philippines, I think this is across the region. Tourism stakeholders are looking for their governments to do a lot more. So, um, what I admire, from afar for the Philippines is, I have seen the DOT developing new tourism circuits. I have seen things like moto tourism. I have seen a focus on adventure tourism and partnering with podcasts. So there's definitely lots of initiatives, I think, that are going on and that are exciting, but that are perhaps not making it to the international stage somehow. I think that there is a lot to shout about that has gone on in the Philippines, and there is this development of destinations beyond, just Boracay. But it really needs to educate overseas tourism stakeholders. So whether that is by doing roadshows overseas, whether that is partnering with overseas reps to really educate the trade on those different destination offerings, or whether it is just going, full scale consumer campaigns. But of course, those all cost money. So I think it does come down to a lot of the tourism boards need to be partnering with the right people in the right markets and getting very clear on which source markets it wants to target, and going all in on those, because obviously, budgets have really been squeezed during the pandemic. Governments can't afford to do massive scale promotions everywhere, so they need to be kind of choosy and pick those right source markets, and then really go full scale, go for it on the consumer side, go for it on the trade side as well, to really bring up that education of what the Philippines offers.
Thank you, Hannah. Appreciate it. Take care, and see you soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Research at Colliers to give us a perspective of the micro look in country. Thanks, Joey.
Thank you, Meryl. It's been a while. I think the last briefing, face-to-face briefing, was 2019, if I'm not mistaken. So good morning, guys. And I'm very pleased to see you all here this morning. This is our presentation. Again, I'm from Colliers, Philippines. So we're a real estate advisory services company. We help bring in BPO companies here in the Philippines. So we help them look for office spaces. But we also cover research studies on the hospitality sector. And again, this is our update. So every quarter, we do presentation on the leisure sector, what's happening to the Philippine economy, and what do we see moving forward, and how will it positively influence the leisure sector. So let me first give you a quick recap of what's happening to the Philippine economy. So we grew by 8.3% first quarter rather of 2022. So this is much better compared to the 3.8% contraction that we posted the first quarter of 2021. The second quarter results will be released, if I'm not mistaken, first week of August. So let's wait for the results. But looking at the economic prospects of the Philippine economy, of course, remittances will play a crucial role. And the remittances account for 10% of our country's GDP. Filipinos are taking advantage of the fact that the peso is depreciating, so they're sending in more money to their families here in the Philippines. And of course, these remittances help drive spending, consumer spending, healthcare, education, transportation, food, groceries, and of course, the staycation market. It helps fuel the domestic leisure spending, which I'll discuss later. Also getting data from the Philippine Statistics Authority. But what is clipping this growth of the Philippine economy and of the Filipinos' propensity to spend on leisure is inflation. And Hannah earlier mentioned that inflation reached 6.1% in June, and this is the fastest in nearly 4 years. And looking at the average inflation, first quarter of 2022, or second quarter rather, so that's 5.5 from 4% second quarter of 2021. So definitely we're seeing a faster inflation rate, and Filipinos now have to dig deeper to pay for food, healthcare, education. And moving forward, this rising inflation will likely temper the Filipinos' ability or propensity to spend on hotels and any leisure-related expenditure. So let me now give you a quick recap of what's happening to the Philippine leisure sector. We're seeing, again, Filipinos rearing to travel. They've been, visiting a lot of tourist destinations here in the Philippines, Visayas, even in Mindanao, and of course in Luzon, you have the likes of Tagaytay and Baguio. This is latest data from the Department of Tourism, 5 months of 2022, about 517,000 international tourists, and that is 1,017% higher compared to what we saw first 5 months of 2021. Looking at the major markets that drove arrivals, you have USA, South Korea, Canada, Australia, United Kingdom, and Japan. So missing here, obviously, is China, which in 2019 became the Philippines' second largest source of international arrivals. So again, looking at the top 6 markets here, you have United States. Okay, so this is for the top 6 markets. Again, it's South Korea, USA, China, Japan, Australia, and Taiwan, which cover historically an average of 70% of all tourist arrivals here in the Philippines. Looking at this gray bar here, that's for 2019. And as you can see, South Korea dominated with 2 million arrivals, followed by China with 1.7 million arrivals. Again, as I mentioned earlier, if you look at the previous slide, Chinese tourists are, well, practically no longer existent, very far from the list. We no longer have POGOs, and as you know, the China market benefited from the Philippine government's visa upon arrival program, and that really helped the country attract more tourists, even high-spending ones from China. But when we looked at the average occupancies for Metro Manila hotels, we're seeing an upside here, 47%. That is for the first half of 2022, a slight improvement from 44% that we recorded first half, or second half rather, of 2021. So this is a vast improvement from what we saw in 2020, when much of the occupancy in Metro Manila was really driven by the hotels being used as quarantine facilities. And at the time, if you take that out, if you take the demand from the quarantine hotels, probably the demand or occupancy would only hover between 30-35%. But this is again mainly driven by business travels that are slowly recovering, businessmen visiting now the Philippines, doing due diligence. Again, we assist a lot of outsourcing companies, and we see them visiting Metro Manila, looking for a viable location office for their BPO operations in the National Capital Region. This is the annual supply pipeline that we have seen. And for 2023, there will be about 2,550 new hotel rooms that will open across Metro Manila. In fact, this is the highest since 2015. And the bulk of these hotels are still 3-star hotels that we will be seeing. In Metro Manila, we have the expansion of Kabayan Hotel. This is in Pasay. Of course, you have Hop in Ortigas also, 231 new hotel rooms. So this is in Ortigas CBD, Ortigas Central Business District. So these are just two of the hotels that opened in the first half of 2022. But there will be more in the pipeline. In fact, about 27% of new hotel rooms that will open from 2022 to 2024 are foreign branded hotels. So you have the first Pullman here. For instance, you have Ibis, you have the likes of Westin and Ortigas CBD, the new Mandarin in Ayala Central Business District of Makati Central Business District, and then you have the likes of Seda also. You have Canvas Hotel by Philinvest. This will be in Quezon City. This is in Cubao within their Activa integrated community or township. Westin, as I mentioned earlier, Ortigas CBD, and then in Bay Area and Newport, another Seda hotel, Red Planet, Ascot, as well as Lanson. So it's a mix of local as well as foreign branded hotels that will open. So revenge travel is pump priming Philippine tourism. This is after more than 2 years of vacation deprivation, and the tourism sector's contribution to GDP. Well, it's starting to increase, although still much lower compared to what we saw pre-pandemic. At its peak, it contributed about 12.8% to the country's GDP. In 2021, it increased marginally to 5.2%. So imagine that. It's not even half of what it used to contribute to the Philippine economy. Even in 2010, we were at about 6-7% contribution of the leisure sector to the Philippine economy, but now it's a much lower, 5.2%. And what we're also seeing is that the contribution of tourism to total number of employed individuals here in the Philippines is rising. In fact, as Hannah objectively mentioned earlier, the problem is how to hire more people, because it will definitely retard the growth of airline companies. Those are now rehiring and are beefing up their manpower to capture pent-up travel demand across the country. And so we are now seeing MICE events, face-to-face briefings, where we're doing this now. I flew all the way from Makati, and this has been, of course, compelling developers to tap this demand for MICE facilities. You have the likes of Okada, SMX, convention centers, facilities that are opening, revamping their facilities, are encouraging more corporate clients to finally conduct these face-to-face events. In fact, based on a regional report released by Colliers in Asia Pacific, the MICE segment will be one of the first subsectors of the leisure sector that will really recover. And in fact, what hotels have been doing is that, first, if you look at the recovery story of hotels here in the Philippines, they first used these hotels as quarantine facilities. They are now beefing up, revamping their food and beverage offerings. They're now encouraging people to hold parties and other corporate events. And of course, we now see the resurgence of MICE events. So this is basically the recovery story that we're seeing for the domestic leisure sector. And we hope that this is sustained beyond 2022. Paradise Reborn, that's how Time Magazine branded Boracay. In fact, if I were to add a little poetic twist to this, Paradise Lost but paradise regained. Given what the Philippine government did, it rehabilitated Boracay. Now it is open to welcoming more guests. Daily carrying capacity of almost 20,000 tourist arrivals in the first 6 months of 2022 reached almost 900,000. This is already 75% of the total arrivals that Boracay attracted back in the first half of 2019, a pre-pandemic level of demand. Now, basically, for Southeast Asia, we're seeing a very good recovery story. The contribution of the tourism to these economies national economic output is rising. This is data from World Travel Tourism Council, as you can see here in the Philippines. So it really dropped in 2020, only 4.8%, but 10.4% for 2021. Looking at Thailand, pre-pandemic, it was at 20%. It dropped substantially to 8% in 2020, but starting to recover right now, although still far from its contribution pre-pandemic period. Looking at Indonesia also, so there will be a slow, gradual recovery in the leisure sector, even for the likes of Vietnam and Malaysia, where tourism is contributing between 2 to 4% of to the national economy. So moving forward, definitely we are seeing key economic indicators that are pointing to recovery, pointing to an upside. This is the restaurants and hotel spending sector. We saw previous contraction, and meaning more Filipinos were skimping basically on travel and leisure and resort and hotel related spending. But as you can see here, 164% increase. This is data from the Philippine Statistics Authority from a 16% contraction back in 2020. But what fuels this is the Philippine economy, which is primarily a domestic consumption-led economy. 75% of our national economic output is contributed by consumer spending. And it is very good to note that the consumption spending, household expenditures, grew by 10.1% in the first half of 2022. So this again will fuel the recovery of leisure-related expenditures across the Philippines. Again, this is a turnaround from a 4.8% contraction in the first quarter of 2021. So basically, very good economic indicators, and hopefully we sustain this beyond 2022. Of course, domestic leisure spending, domestic travel in general will definitely be the first to kickstart the recovery of the Philippine leisure sector. I would just like to share with you some interesting results of informal surveys that we would hold during our briefings at Colliers Philippines. So every quarter we would have these briefings, and then we would have Zoom surveys. So these are polls run through Zoom. So the one question that we asked, this was in fourth quarter of 2020. So the briefing was held around January of 2021. Are you willing to work in a hotel room converted into a flexible workspace? Of course, this was a period when we saw very low hotel occupancies across Metro Manila, and the government barred the foreign tourists from entering the Philippines and even local staycations. But based on this survey, 2/3 of our respondents said that yes, they are willing to occupy a hotel room that is converted into a flexible workspace. So that's 66% responding in the affirmative versus 34% that said no. So interesting to see if hotels will continue to convert some of their hotel or their rooms into flexible workspaces. Although we saw this mid of 2020 when, of course, hotels had to pivot to stay afloat and had to convert their hotel rooms into flexible workspaces. So let's check the next slide, please. Did the clicker stop? Okay. So this is another question that we asked: where do you plan to travel once travel restrictions and requirements are lifted? So it's the top destinations still are the likes of Boracay as well as Palawan, ranging from about 33 to 47%. So these are the top two destinations, followed by Cebu. Then, next slide. More than 2 years into the pandemic, are you now willing to attend face-to-face events? So when we first asked this, so look at the inner circle, that was second quarter of 2021. We had this briefing about July of 2021, so only 20% said yes. Then when we asked this again, fourth quarter of 2021, that was about latter part of January of this year, 57% already said yes. So we want to ask this again in our next briefing. I won't be surprised if we will see more of our respondents now willing to attend a face-to-face event, something like this one. Next slide. So again, these are just some of the initiatives introduced by the new DOT administration. So we're still looking at more concrete plans, but overall, what they have been pushing for is to promote Mindanao, develop and promote farm tourism. They're now pitching Davao as a top diving destination. The Philippines also is being promoted as a key destination for Japanese retirees. They want to position Clark as and the new Clark City as a tourism investment hub. And from what we read, based on the releases of the Department of Tourism, they want to welcome more Hollywood filmmakers here in the Philippines. So these are the leisure sector opportunities that will definitely drive and enable the recovery of the Philippine leisure market. Continued easing of travel restrictions. So we're now removing all these paperwork, all the documentary requirements for tourists to visit and enter the Philippines. The rehiring of employees, airline employees, and resumption of more flights, Cebu to Australia, Korean Air also, or some Korean airlines also now resuming operations here in the Philippines. The staycation market definitely is already starting to see glimmers, a glint of recovery, green shoots of recovery, a glint of optimism. Business travel is again starting to resume. We now see more foreigners visiting the Philippines, doing due diligence, and even conducting MICE briefings, face-to-face briefings, including this one. And again, the uptick in foreign arrivals, first 5 months of 2022 versus first 5 months of 2021, we recorded 1,017% increase in foreign international arrivals. So that is a very optimistic point for the Philippine tourism sector, and we hope we sustain that. Again, another interesting point here is, do we promote the Philippines more aggressively to markets outside of the top 6 that used to cover 70% of our historic or annual arrivals? Because, of course, we want to attract the long haul, the high spending tourists, those from Europe perhaps, but also Southeast Asia. As Hannah mentioned, this is a low hanging fruit that we can really tap for the Philippine travel market. So these are the headwinds and tailwinds generally for the Philippine leisure sector. So what are the tailwinds? So what are the positives? Again, the further easing of travel restriction, more business travelers returning here in the Philippines. Domestic staycation market definitely is expanding and is on the rise, and then rebound on foreign arrivals and expenditure. So definitely these are the pluses, but we need to keep an eye on the possible reimposition of a travel restriction, especially if we see another strain of Omicron variant, another strain of a virus that might hamper the sector's recovery. High fuel prices, which will likely result in higher airfare hikes or in airfare increases, and of course, the looming global recession. Let's not forget inflation. A lot of economies are experiencing this. The Philippines, no exception. 6.1% inflation. That was in June of 2022, the highest in nearly 4 years. So that is another headwind for the Filipinos' ability and propensity to spend on a vacation, on travel, and any hotel-related expenditure. So overall, what we can say is that the Philippine property is in a wait-and-see mode. Again, for the office market, we're seeing BPOs continuously occupying office space. And if you look at the travel market, an opportunity here, of course, is the staycation market. You have the young, energetic, and high-spending millennials that will definitely fuel the recovery of the domestic travel sector. The residential market is also recovering. So more Filipinos are purchasing condominium, and the ability and the interest to buy condominium, in fact, marginal increase to 5% from 4% in 2021 based on data by the central bank. And business and consumer optimism are also on the rise. So meaning more businesses are expanding, more Filipinos being employed. So this will infuse a much needed confidence and ability to spend in the leisure market. Retail is also recovering. If you go around malls, consumer traffic footfall is at 60-70% of pre-pandemic level. And again, because of high spending from Filipinos fueled by OFW remittances, which reached $35 billion in 2021, that will again have a positive impact on the Filipinos hotel and restaurant spending. And again, encapsulating all what we have discussed, definitely the hotel sector is bound for rebound. We may not still see foreign arrivals or domestic tourists that we used to see pre-pandemic in 2019. We've yet to see 2019 levels. Foreign arrivals, we attracted 8.2 million back in 2019. We're still far from that mark. In fact, the DOT is only projecting 2 million international tourist arrivals for 2022. But again, these are green shoots of recovery already for the leisure market, and we hope that the global air travel rebounds at a much faster pace. IATA initially projected global air travel to pick up in 2024, but now they are forecasting this to grow at a much faster pace, a much faster recovery. In fact, they're now looking at 2023. Phil Hotel Owners Association, they're looking at 2024. In fact, according to Executive Director Bengzon, the next year and a half will be crucial for the leisure sector's recovery. So a lot of optimism in the market, and we hope that this spills over to 2022, 2023, and even 2024 until we fully reach the global air travel sector's recovery. And this, of course, hopefully spills over to the local leisure sector here in the Philippines, which benefits all of us who are stakeholders of the Philippine travel and tourism sector. So yeah, that concludes my presentation. I think we're opening the floor for questions. Meryl?
Any questions from the group? You have a question for virtual.
Hi, we have a question from the virtual platform from Jerome de la Fuente. This event is very good, which surely missed by local key stakeholders in Manila. Will surely missed by a local key stakeholders in Manila. can you have a repeat of this event in Manila? If you can join us again in Manila in the next
Sure,
show.
sure. Of course. Sure po.
Okay. We'll request more questions for a while. Do you have any questions from our attendees?
None?
Joey, there are a lot of branded hotels now.
Yes.
How do you see the occupancies for branded hotels versus independents?
Well, when we looked at these branded hotels occupancies pre-pandemic, we were, averaging at about 60-70%. That was pre-pandemic. But the independent ones, we're talking about the local branded hotels, not far off. I think that would be about 50-60% occupancies. I think the branded hotels, of course, used to benefit from the business travels pre-pandemic, which was really brisk. So we saw this very good occupancies in Fort Bonifacio, in Makati, CPD. But I think the local ones, those by Ayala, for example, Seda, are really catching up. And of course, Ayala, they used to partner with international branded hotels as well. So that we see this, of course, this experience with international brands also being reflected, with the way Seda is being run at this point. So pretty decent occupancies, and they're really catching up in terms of occupancies, at least in Metro Manila. Definitely. In fact, anecdotally, a lot of people have been visiting Tagaytay as well as Baguio. Some are looking at La Union as well as Aurora. So these are, when you ask around and then you talk to your millennial friends, these are their top choices. And in fact, with some tour operators, and these are among their favorite destinations, especially in Luzon.
May I also ask, since you already have forecasted for 2024 on the rate of tourism here in the Philippines, do you also have some forecast regarding on the inflation situation also for the next 2 years maybe? Any website also?
Unfortunately, we're not in the business of inflation projection, but at least for 2023, based on some economic analysts' projection, we're probably looking at about 6 to 7% for the remainder of 2022, and probably end the year at about 5 to 6% inflation. The last time that we saw inflation this high was in 2018. That was an average of 5.4, if I'm not mistaken. So this is one key indicator again that we need to watch out for, especially on its impact with the way we spend on basic commodities and even on travel. So, of course, the central bank has been very active in trying to tamper inflation by raising interest rates already, raising basic interest rates by 125 basis points, the basic interest rate, now at 3.25 from 2% in 2020. So let's see, this will definitely increase. And we're really far off the 2 to 4% in inflation target of the central bank initially. So that forecast has been thrown out of the window. We're definitely approaching inflation of between 5 to 6%. That's for sure for this year.
Aloha. Mabuhi. My name is Bazi Budlong, and I build canoes, hybrid canoes, for racing edition.
Okay.
And in 2009, I kayak or paddle from southern tip to the northern tip of the Philippines. This is supported with the OT to promote Philippines as the paddling destination. So my company is Island Bus Philippines. And most of those you're mentioning about hotels, I coastal hug most of the islands in some parts of Cebu by paddling, And I like the discussion, about how to recreate our Visayas destination. I have seen the contrast of the shoreline from north to south of Cebu because we paddled it. And I like this, just like what they said, that hopefully this will happen in Manila also. And that is a good news. And so I am developing a tourism, water sports tourism. So this is about canoeing and
Interesting.
kayaking and sailing, because we have traditional canoes in Visayas, in Tanyon Strait and Cebu. But during the strong tailwinds and the high winds of Amihan wind, the tourism stops, to travel across the island. So what I'm building is a canoe that is hybrid, that I believe that will increase our tourism in Visayas also.
Yes.
So my question is, how can we work together on this in this future? So after this program, and thank you so much for having this here in Cebu, this Philippine Tourism Outlook 2022. This envision on how can we create hybrid constructions, because of the strong Odette are coming and the high seas. I have seen the sea level rising by paddling in the lagoons, in the sanctuary, the protected areas. So these areas.
Oh.
So it's a beautiful place. Cebu is a special place in the
definitely.
Visayas.
Definitely.
So thank you so much, everyone. Congratulations.
Yeah, we would be more than willing to hold similar events, whether in Visayas or in Manila. I went to Zamboanga 2-3 weeks ago, and even in Mindanao. So let's see. I mean, opportunities abound, especially now that the tourism sector is starting to rebound.
I'd like to ask, for the real estate market, which is your specialization, is there any change in terms of demand for either condominiums or residential, or what is your projection on real estate prices in the Philippines? Is it stagnant? Is it going up, going down? Maybe you can give us a brief idea about the real estate market in general.
Okay, well, thanks for putting me on the spot where that's supposed to be discussed in our July 20th presentation. But it's interesting that you asked. In Metro Manila or even in Luzon, what we have been seeing is a stable demand for the horizontal projects, house and lot-only projects. Especially even if you ask the major developers, they would tell you that there has been a strong demand for these horizontal landed residential projects. In Metro Manila, we have seen a slowdown in the condominium market, the vertical sector, especially in 2022. We're no longer seeing the POGO sector, which partly drove the take-up for condominiums, especially in the Bay Area. We saw a correction in prices, and that was normal for every period of economic slump. We saw that across Metro Manila, there has been 15-20% correction of prices in the secondary condominium market. But we're likely to see a recovery in condominium prices 2022 to 2024, averaging at about 2.4% every year. So it's still a slow recovery, but a recovery nonetheless compared to the correction that we saw in 2020 and 2021. So for price, especially in the pre-selling market, of course, the developers continue to launch projects, especially for the mid-income to luxury. These are the 3.2 to 6 to 8 million pesos for condominium unit. But you'd be surprised to see that it's really the luxury market that's doing well. So 8 million pesos and up. The likes of Rockwell are doing very well still. Shank Properties. So I think these are the most favorable price segments still in Metro Manila at this point.
Hello, sir. Good morning.
Morning.
As in the construction industry, so my question is, what is there any data that concerns the build of the Duterte administration? How did it affect the tourism? And my opinion about the tourism is the tourist is that they hate the traffic of the Philippines.
That's
so
correct.
is there any data that somehow it improved the tourism?
Basic data that I can provide, build has really intensified infrastructure spending across the Philippines. So prior to Duterte administration, we were only averaging 2 to 3% of our GDP spent on infrastructure. But when President Duterte came in, it was a golden age of infrastructure. Well, perhaps not yet the golden age, still far from achieving that golden age status. But what I can tell is that there were projects that were really intensified, especially for the tourism sector. You have the likes of Clark Airport modernization, Cebu. Terminal 2 was opened, it was modernized, it was expanded. Zamboanga Airport. So these are some of the projects that benefited from the government's Build program, and definitely benefits the travel and tourism sector. On your point on the transportation, well, the government is building Mega Manila Subway. This is in Metro Manila. So the focus should not just be on private cars, but also on mass transportation. I think that's really a good indicator of successful master planning and a successful infrastructure push. The rich ones leaving their cars behind and using mass public transportation. I think that's a very good indicator of an effective infrastructure program. So hopefully we see that completed by 2026. I think that's the initial phase of implementation.
We have a question from the virtual platform again. Good day. I was fortunate to have attended last seminar in Cebu City. I would like to note the measures taken for foreigners interested to buy shipping Philippine products.
What's the question? Shipping?
Yes. Okay, let's move to the next question. What will be the main driver of growth for tourism for Philippines? No COVID-19, no corruption, new airports, new resorts at this point next year for foreign tourists. From Ray Anthony Rodriguez.
I would say all of the above. Of course, you want an administration that will really support the infrastructure push, the tourism development. And earlier I highlighted the programs that the new tourism administration will likely implement. A push for Mindanao, a promotion of Davao, Clark being promoted as a retirees spot in Southeast Asia. And of course, this will all be fueled by the government's Build program. And we hope that the 5.5 to 6% infrastructure allocation is continued from 2022 to 2028, because only then will we be able to say that, and welcome more tourists here in the Philippines and throw a glance at our more than 7,100 islands.
Hi.
Hi, ma'am.
Hi. The new tourism secretary is Cristina Frasco. It's a Cebu.
From Cebu.
Yeah, so I hope that will augur well for us. But anyway, what do you think can the government, I'm always talking about the government because I see them, What do you think can the government do, especially under this new administration, to propel the tourism industry into more than what it used to be?
I think infrastructure push.
Or what can the new secretary, what should be the first things that this administration do to get the tourism industry going in this pandemic?
In this pandemic, I think initially the new tourism administration highlighted the importance of infrastructure, and I agree. It should be more inclusive, meaning more infrastructure across the Philippines that will promote even the missionary destinations, those that were left behind. It's not just about Boracay or Camiguin, or those in Luzon, such as Baguio or Tagaytay, that we need to visit. But perhaps improving the road network, that's also important. So not just the airports, but also improving mass transportation system. Only then can we welcome more tourists here in the Philippines. I think that infrastructure really is very important, because how can you attract more tourists if you have a very low capacity in terms of your airport terminals, right? So I think that is a good start. And also promotion of other destinations. Again, it's not just Boracay. When we talk about Philippine tourism, explore other locations in Visayas and in Mindanao. A lot of beautiful places here in the Philippines that still need to be explored. So connectivity is important, modernization of existing infrastructure, and aggressive promotion of the Philippines. Again, we can be promoted as a medical tourism facility or a retirement destination. So there's a lot of programs that we can introduce, and I think the Department of Tourism, the new administration, has lined up initial programs which we believe can really kickstart the recovery of the Philippine tourism under this administration.
We have another question from the platform. Since you already mentioned about medical tourism, is there a future in this?
When we did some studies on the medical tourism and its viability here in the Philippines, one of the roadblocks was really the accreditation of insurance companies from the United States. How can a U.S. citizen with a US-based insurance company be able to benefit here in the Philippines, or be able to avail of these health benefits? Because that was the initial roadblock. They cannot avail of these health benefits. They can't use their US-registered insurance plan. So that has really need to be settled, or need to be arranged by the Philippine government and our counterparts from the United States. That's really important, so that we can really tap the Philippines as a medical tourism hub. We all have world-class doctors, nurses, and facilities. It's just the accreditation of these US-registered insurance that we really need to settle and clear. Okay, thank you, Meryl. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joey. As always, a great resource. All right, so our next speaker will be talking about really the lifestyle issue, which is air conditioning. So we're going to now introduce you to Mike Dodden, of my office mate from Concepcion Carrier.
Good morning. My name is Mike Dowden from Concepcion Industrial Corporation, and I'm very happy to be with you today with this brief presentation, which I have entitled Smart Management of Your Main Cost Center. Before I go into the presentation itself, I would like to give you a brief background on our company, Concepcion, which was started in 1962. So we're actually celebrating our 60th year this year. In the interest of time, I won't be going through all of the milestones, but I guess you would be more familiar with the brands that we carry, such as Carrier, Condura, Otis, Midea. These are some of the brands that are carried by the Concepcion Group here in the Philippines. In terms of products, especially for buildings and hotels, I think some of you would be familiar with some of our commercial air conditioning solutions. So as you can see, we carry everything from the smallest window unit all the way to the largest chillers, including controls monitoring systems as well. One thing we're quite known for, and what separates us from the other companies out there is the fact that we have nationwide after sales support. So we are able to support your building, your project, wherever it is located all over the Philippines. In terms of reference projects, I kind of picked some hotels here that you might be quite familiar with and other residential high-rise applications. But we also do have other projects like most of the airports actually are cooked by Carrier. So not just in the vertical space, but also in the horizontal manufacturing and other industrial projects. You can see a Carrier or a Toshiba brand installed there. So for this morning, I'm going to focus a bit on engineering solutions for hotels. So a lot of you are wondering why focus on buildings, right? And if you take a look at this slide, this is the global energy Pareto. You'll see that buildings account for 40% of the global energy consumption. And this is a study made in the US. And of those, for all the buildings, 40% of the energy consumption within those buildings go to air conditioning. And for a hotel, especially in the tropics, in a tropical country like ours, the chiller plant, which is where you have your chillers and your cooling towers, your pumps, they contribute 45% of energy consumption. And when you get into that chiller plant itself, 70% of the energy consumed by the chiller plant is going to be your chiller. Okay, 24% for the pumps and 6% for the rest. So really, you can see why hotels, why buildings, why chillers or air conditioning systems are really a big concern when it comes to global energy consumption. Now, let me show you a bit or talk about the chiller plant efficiency. This slide looks a bit complicated, but actually, you're just looking at your input, which is your power supply, going into your chiller plant system, which is composed of your chillers, pumps, and cooling towers, and coming up with an output, which is the cold air that you use to cool hotel lobbies, rooms, shops, restaurants, etc. So your goal is to reduce the required electricity input. So if you get your system to be very efficient, you will be able to come up with the right cooling output using the least amount of electricity possible. So chiller plant efficiency is measured by kilowatts per ton. So it's input electricity over the output, and then you get your efficiency. In this particular illustration, the chiller plant efficiency is 1.2 kilowatts per ton, right? So we'll move on to the next slide. And by the way, the lower that number is, the better, the more efficient your system is. So let's put some numbers to it so that you'd be able to appreciate. So let's say, for example, you had a hotel with an average cooling load of 500 tons. As being a hotel, it operates 24 hours, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. At a chiller plant efficiency of 1.2 kilowatts per ton and electricity cost of 10.5 pesos per kilowatt hour, that means 500 times 24 times 365 times 1.2, which is the chiller plant efficiency, times 10.5, which is the cost of electricity, you'd probably be paying 55 million pesos a year or 4.6 million pesos a month. Now, let's say the efficiency is improved to say 0.8 kilowatts per ton. So from 1.2 it goes down to 0.8. And as I mentioned earlier, the lower that number is, the better because it's more efficient. Bringing down the 1.2 to 0.8 alone gives you a savings of 1.5 million pesos per month, or a total savings of 18 million pesos a year. So that's why it is important for us to focus on buildings, on chillers, or any air conditioning system that your facility happens to be using. Now, the question there is, where would your building be in this slide? And if you take a look at it, there's a red line there at 0.70. So as I mentioned, the lower the kilowatt per ton or the efficiency, the lower that number is, the higher the efficiency is. All right. So in our example, a while ago, we were talking about 1.2 kilowatts per ton. And as you see here, there are chillers or there are hotels that are running at 1.3, some at 1.10, some at 1. That's basically what we consider the poor range. This study was done in Singapore. They have very efficient chillers and plants in Singapore, which is why you see some of them operating under the 0.70. All right. A while ago, we were talking about a reduction from 1.2 down to 0.8. So if you take a look at your building, and this was done through an energy audit in Singapore, where would your building be in this graph? Will it be above the 1 or below the 1? And as you can see, there's already Singapore. You still have a lot of inefficient buildings there. Could you imagine what it's like in the Philippines? So if you were in the 1.3, the 1.2 range today, imagine if you're able to bring it down to 0.8 or to 0.70, right? So you can see the arrows showing you that in terms of the savings that you could actually get, you could save as much as 46% in your chiller plant efficiency, 46% in energy savings for the chiller plant itself, or an impact to your total bill of about 21%. So that's a big, big savings for any company. And this is why it is important that we're having this discussion today. So again, why hotels? Let's be specific. A while ago, we were saying why buildings, and now we're saying why hotels. Well, first of all, as we mentioned earlier, hotels operate 24 hours, 7 days a week, and 365 days a year. And electricity is a major cost of operation, or that's a major part of your OPEX. Now, hotels operate mostly on part load. And by part load, we mean the requirement for cooling is not always at 100% because your hotel probably does not always have a 100% occupancy, right? So chances are there are rooms, there are function rooms, restaurants that are not occupied during certain times of the day. Therefore, they will need less cooling. They have a lower cooling requirement or cooling load. Now, the thing is, when most designers design a hotel air conditioning system, most of them will design it at 100% and even place a buffer. So if you're only operating at part load, then you have a lot of excess in there. So it's very important that you get to deal with an air conditioning partner that knows what they are doing and can satisfy the exact requirements of your hotel, and of course your designers as well. Now, this is a reality. Many hotel buildings are aging and are operating at low efficiency. So if you saw the slide a while ago from Singapore, if we do something similar here, I bet we would have more hotels on the higher bracket, which is basically a lower efficiency. Now, the chart that you see below, that graph that you see below, actually shows the electricity consumption of different types of buildings and establishments. And you'll see here that hotels are the highest, second being shopping malls and hospitals. So it is indeed a big concern when it comes to electricity. And why not, especially in the Philippines, where we have the highest electricity in Asia. You take a look at this chart done a couple of years ago. Manila was number one, and Cebu was, that's number three, basically, after Singapore. So we do pay an arm and a leg for energy in the Philippines. That's why it's really, really important that we focus on efficiency. Now, there's an interesting slide that I'd like to share with you guys. And if there's a slide that you go away with after this presentation, let it be this one. This is called the air conditioning life cycle cost. Now, as you might know, the operators or the developers are not always the operators of a hotel. So most of the time, it's the developers that make that decision to buy the chiller. And the operators are the ones that get to operate it. But if you take a look at this one, the focus of the developer is mainly on the capex, or the first cost. So they're going to want a chiller that's low in price. However, if you take a look at it, if you consider the OPEX side of it, or the cost to operate, you have the power consumption plus equipment maintenance, consumables, water, and other expenses. The operating cost outweighs the capex. In this particular case, it's almost like an 80-20 ratio. So we focus on that 20%, trying to find a low-cost equipment, when in fact, we're paying an arm and a leg with operating costs, which is 80% of the life cycle cost. Let me put some numbers to that here. So here you see, option A makes use of 3 chillers that have a cost of about, this is about, I think, $1.350 million, okay, as opposed to option B, which is cheaper by $350,000. It's only $1 million. All right. So if you take a look at it, option B is actually way cheaper. However, if you take a look at the efficiency or the electricity costs, you will see that option A actually is more efficient and will eat up less electricity. As you can see, option A is 0.66. Option B is 0.8. All right. So you have option A that is more expensive. The unit is more expensive, but of higher efficiency, as opposed to option B, which is cheaper in terms of the actual unit, but has a lower efficiency. Therefore, you spend more on electricity. So your savings from your initial investment, the savings of the developer or the developer's cost is $350,000. But if you take a look at the additional cost or avoidable cost over a life cycle of 15 years, which the operator needs to pay, that's $2.3 million. So a lot of the time we focus on trying to save $350,000 when in fact we end up spending more in terms of electricity at $2.3 million. Now let's talk about the design assumptions. I mentioned the design assumptions a while ago. I was saying that the designers normally design at peak load, or 100, and in this particular case, they were designing at 110%. Now, how do they arrive at that? So first, they take a look at the heat load or the solar load. Okay, are you facing the sun, or is the area that you are in exposed to direct sunlight? Another is occupancy. How many people occupy the area? Ventilation load. Is there enough fresh air? Are there windows? And of course, equipment load. What are the electrical equipments that are operating? Because it all contributes to the overall heat load calculation. So what they do is they take all these loads and they come up with an additional 10% safety. So most of the time, the design is done at 110% peak load. Now let's take a look at the next slide. Okay, my slide has frozen. There you go. Okay, sorry, let me just check. So as I mentioned, if you take a look at this, engineers often select chiller performance or assume them to be at 100% load condition. And in reality, hotels operate at part load. So if you take a look at this chart, we made some estimates on the efficiency of the unit at part load. So if you see here, it says at 50% part load, the chiller is 25% less efficient than at full load. So it really would have been better if we would have calculated the actual or the more realistic load profile of the hotel. Now, here's a sample that we use in Carrier Singapore, where we show the design load, the design peak load, and the actual peak load. So you see there's a difference from 1,000 tons down to 700 tons. So the thing that you would need to, it's okay to design something at at 100 load, 100% load, especially if your area gets really hot and humid. However, the more important question is, what is my efficiency at the actual? Because a lot of partners will give you efficiency estimates at the design load. But if you're not operating at the design load, it's very important to find out what the efficiency is at the actual peak load. Now here I want to show you some of the other issues that we have faced, which have contributed to building inefficiency. One of it is the change in building applications. There are times when we actually install a chiller and everything is nice, but by the time we come back, because we're supposed to do, let's say, for example, some maintenance, we find out that there have been changes in the hotel. So like, a boardroom that was converted into a bedroom that became a computer room, or a restaurant that was converted into a gym or a supermarket. You see different areas of the hotel will have different requirements. So it's very important that we stick to what was originally designed. And if ever there would be changes, it would be good to inform your air conditioning partner so that they can see if there's a change, a commensurate change that needs to happen in your air conditioning system. All right. Another is improper maintenance. So here you see, an example of scale building up, and then how it looks like after you clean the tubes. So really here you have a problem in terms of infrequent maintenance, improper maintenance, or sometimes no maintenance at all, because let's admit it, we've seen some areas that are practically run to fail. So very important to maintain your air conditioning system. regularly. Lack of controls monitoring is also a key contributor to inefficiency. A lot of us are still using the manual operating instructions, right? And sometimes the people inside the plant room, they're humans, so sometimes they miss out on some of this. And if your technician or your operator is on leave, then nobody's going to conduct this complicated orchestra called your chiller system, right? But if you have the right monitoring controls and tools, you would be able to, or it would be able to ensure that your system is always running at an optimal level. So if you're still using manual, you might want to consider automating it. And that's an area where our company could be of help for you in order to allow you to optimize and even save money. Eventually, it pays for itself. Now, how do we make our customers happy? You see, in a hotel, there are many customers. Aside from the guests, you also have the owner, the management, the staff, and the facilities manager to satisfy. And your guest is looking for comfort, obviously. The owner is looking for savings. The staff wants easy and safe operation. And the facilities manager, of course, wants it to be engineering friendly. So in case something happens, it's going to be easy to repair, maintain, or in order to keep your uptime. So as we know, if your customers are satisfied, they will come back again and again, and they will become loyal customers, and it becomes a stable or steady revenue for you that will lead to stable hotel operation. And of course, cost savings is a very big portion of that as well. So how do we intend to help you out in terms of savings? Well, we have several that I'll be discussing here. One is if you focus on your hotel indoor environment optimization. Number two, for different areas, there are different solutions. So you need to consult with your HVAC partner. You might want to consider a higher efficiency chiller. I'll talk briefly about a hot water solution. And lastly, chiller plant management optimization. Why are we doing this? Because as we said, air conditioning is 40% of a building's energy consumption. And if you take a look at hot water, the electricity from the boilers, that's basically another 10% savings. Okay. On the hotel indoor environment, we do have some solutions like a low noise fan coil unit. Okay, since it's a hotel, people want to be relaxed, and the last thing you want is that sound in some hotel rooms as if there's gas passing through the system, right? And they hear that, and sometimes it could get really annoying. So we have low noise fan coil units that could reduce the sound levels by about 2 to 3 decibels. We have fresh air systems and the indoor air quality options. Also a brushless DC motor that can save up to 23% to even 73%, depending on what you're currently using in terms of energy. We also have hotel air system solutions. So we have fresh air units that you can use for your large conference rooms, and also some heat recovery options. I'll show you some of that in the succeeding slide. Of course, chiller optimization, I mentioned this a while ago. Instead of going manual, you'd like a chiller system that basically conducts your chiller system like an orchestra, because sometimes it takes a combination of things, from your indoor units to the outdoor units to the air handling units to the blowers, the fans. They all have to work at the exact same parameter depending on the cooling load. And if you're still relying on manual, it's going to be hard to maintain your system. So chances are you will have air imbalance in your hotel, and your hotel guests are going to say, how come in this area it's cold, in that area it's not? This is what a chiller optimization software can do for you. The hot water solution I was talking about a while ago, you see, take a look at the graph down there. One of the biggest energy consumption for a building or a hotel would be the boilers, right? And we have a product called the heat machine that can actually replace your boiler. And if you pair that together with the chiller, you're actually able to get cold air and hot water at the same time. Okay. Of course, you need an energy efficient chiller, as mentioned a while ago. And you saw that graph where we had the buildings on the top and on the bottom. So if your building happens to be on the top, which is inefficient, you want it to transfer to the bottom and generate that savings, we have a whole line of energy efficient chillers that we could offer you. As I mentioned a while ago, different solutions for different types of spaces. So if we're talking about a guest room, you'd want the air quality to be better there, right? So you'd probably choose a low noise fan coil unit with a fresh air system and other indoor air quality options. On the other hand, if you're talking on the extreme, if you're talking about a banquet hall, it's a big area, and you need fresh air and high volume of dehumidifying that's required. So we have a low temp all air system solution that can fit that requirement, and different solutions, of course, for conference rooms, executive suites, lobbies, and all the other areas. So if you put all of those together into one energy savings roadmap, let's say, for example, your baseline is on the left side here, where you have an old chiller and you're using an old boiler. Okay, we're saying here that if you change your chiller, the change of the chiller alone will result to a 17% chiller plant saving. Okay, and then if you use variable speed drive pumps for your chilled water, you'd be able to save another 7%. If you use a chiller optimization software, you'll be saving another 7%. And if you combine it with a heat machine for the hot water solution, that's another 8%, or a total of 39%. So that's almost 40% of savings that you can get just by implementing some of these. Now, of course, not all sites are the same. So these are just examples that we're using, but we would be more than happy if you have any requirement, we'd be more than happy to send our technical experts to your site to make an evaluation and even give a proposal from equipment supply all the way to installation and maintenance, and even retrofit if you want to change your existing. All right, so those are just some of the ways that we feel we could help hotels like you save energy, which means saving money, which means staying competitive, keeping your customers happy, having higher occupancy rates, and probably even expansion. So with that, we are able to keep all our customers happy, from the hotel owner to the hotel operator and ultimately to the hotel guest. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed this brief presentation and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you. Good morning. My name is Mike Dowd.
Welcome to the virtual Cebu. Okay, thank you for your presentation. I guess the question I have is, most of the hotel owners that are here have existing hotels in operation, right? So what do you recommend that, based on your presentation, what should they look at now in terms of an existing air conditioning system, whether it's going to be window rack or a chiller or high wall? What do you think they should look at?
Good morning, Meryl. First of all, I'd like to check my audio. Are you guys hearing me properly?
Yes.
Awesome, awesome. All right. Okay, well, hi to everybody online right now. And well, first of all, I would advise choosing the right partner, especially since air conditioning is a big chunk of your hotel's expenses, both from a CapEx or OpEx perspective. And as I presented earlier, right? And it pays to partner with a reliable supplier who can provide you with quality air conditioning equipment. Not just that, but also the technical expertise. And most importantly, dependable after-sales support, be it parts availability or service. You see, in the hotel business, downtime is your enemy. And because customers will not occupy a room if the aircon is not working, right? So it directly affects your occupancy rate. Another factor is the brand. Although, you know, most people might consider aircon as, you know, all aircons to be the same. But it's also always an advantage if you use a brand that is known for quality and durability. And why is that? Because it makes your customer feel that they are really getting their money's worth, right? And you don't want to scrimp whenever it comes to ensuring the comfort of your customers, right? So it's part of the whole luxury experience, which is really what customers aspire for whenever they stay in a hotel. And lastly, my advice is choose OpEx over CapEx. And what I mean by that is instead of just looking at the equipment cost, which is just a one-time cost, by the way, look into the cost to run or the cost to operate, which includes your electricity, your water consumption, especially for water-based systems, the water treatment, right? That you regularly do, and of course the cleaning, taking out all that scale. Especially in Cebu, where the water is known to be hard, right? And by that, I think you guys know that it could really cause some problems, some clogging in your system. Sometimes, no matter what kind of chemicals you put, right, there's still some that stays there. So maintenance and also repair are recurring costs that hit you over the lifespan of your equipment, which in the case of a chiller could be about 15 years. And as I said in the presentation, the first time cost might be less than just 30% of your total cost, okay? And the remaining 70% is what's going to hit you in the long run, which is the operating cost. So bottom line, I mean, do not just consider the CapEx, that's a one-time. Consider the OpEx, because that's what's gonna, you know, burn your pocket even more in the long run. So sometimes people just buy the most inexpensive equipment, sacrificing the efficiency. So short-term gain, but long-term loss. I hope that answers your question, Meryl.
Okay. Mike, for, I guess, even just as consumers here, right? How often should they clean their air conditioning?
Well, okay. It really depends. Normally, for residential, it used to be just twice a year. Okay, but you know, right now with the way the quality of the external air is, right, and the kind of weather that we are having, right now we're actually recommending them to clean it every quarter. Now, for a chiller, the best way really is to have operators in your facility that look at your chiller basically, you know, on a daily basis. And there are reports that can come out if you have the right monitoring system, it's going to show you when it's time to clean. So you see, all of the periodic maintenance schedules are practically rules of thumb, and that's why in other areas, like in other countries, for example, like in Japan, the chillers work so efficiently because it's so clean, right? But if you're in the Philippines or in India or in other third world countries, for example, you're gonna have to clean more often, right? And it also depends on your unit. If your unit is new, then chances are the regular cleaning will probably do. But if it's an old chiller, you're gonna need to clean it more often than the usual. So it really pays to either have your own in-house guys or to partner with a supplier that can provide after-sales service and do those frequent checkups for you.
That's good. Thanks, Mike. Let's open up questions to the audience. Any questions? Okay. Okay, cool. Okay. Thank you very much, Mike. Appreciate it. Thanks for the information.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. See you later. Bye. So why don't we take a 5-minute break, and then we'll start the panel discussion with Fraser and with Hanky. So if we can get back by 12 noon, then we'll start. Thank you. Hi, Fraser. Hi, Fraser. Hi, Hanky.
All right.
Hi, guys. Well, let me give the audience a little bit of an intro on you both. We're blessed to have them both with us because they're both trendsetters. I had the pleasure of first working with Fraser when I was with the Peninsula Group in Hong Kong. You know, I was just thinking about it, Fraser, 26 years ago. Even before internet. It literally was, I think, the year before internet. And at that time, oh, by the way, Fraser's role was he was the technology guru for Peninsula Hotels. So in 1996, when I joined the Kowloon Hotel, it was already voted the world's most technologically advanced hotel at its time. Because if you can imagine, there's no internet, right? So Fraser was able to give us the ability to have word processing, email, right, and video games in 1996, right? So way ahead of everybody. Now, Hanky is also a trendsetter, and I've known Hanky certainly for over a decade. From the early days of his first Henry Hotel in Cebu, and blazing away, and a great story in of itself, and that you'll get to know. So let's get started, gentlemen. So, first question to you guys is that in the age, it was pre-pandemic, everything was sort of looking the same. All the brands, whether it's Marriott's or the Starwoods, they all had so many brands that all started looking like each other, right? So Peninsula was always unique in the luxury end. And Hanky, when you created Henry Hotels, it's basically not like anybody else. So where do you see that now, post-pandemic, where there's a move towards going digital? There's a move towards going digital also because there's not enough labor. So where do you see the evolution of hotels now moving towards? So,
Merrill, it's good to see you again. You look younger than ever. I think that the hotel business is changing in as much as that the needs of the guests, or the perceived needs of the guests, have changed. We don't need the Rolls Royce anymore. We need a good gymnasium, and I think this is what we're seeing in hotels globally. But we're also with owners who have suffered pretty badly through this epidemic, and have to go start making money. Otherwise, they're going to be shut down forever. So that's really where I see it at this point. Just a quick note. In 1985, we put the first satellite antennas on the peninsula and gave people television from around Asia, and nobody else had done that, and it was considered to be interesting. But it wasn't until we did the Kowloon Hotel, where, as you say, we offered all these opportunities, but we had to hand build it under canvas on the roof of the peninsula and carry it across the road. And since then, all sorts of things have evolved, and it's no longer that smart, although it was good fun at the time. I think it's about serving the guest. And when we designed the telecentre, it was about serving the guest and their needs when they're travelling. They need to be able to type a fax or send a message or look up the weather information. And in later stage, and I think in your time, we created the street directory where the guest could input a destination on the machine, and it would print out in Cantonese or in Chinese characters, because in Hong Kong we have several names for destinations, and it was hard for the taxi to know where to take them, and as a result we'd end up with arguments outside the gate between the guests in the peninsula and the taxi driver. So it's an evolving thing, an evolving process, and it won't stop. It's got young people coming up now with better ideas than we've had. I watch with interest of the metaverse. I'm not sure how that works, but it is another step, and it needs to be played with to develop it properly. Sorry.
I think I forgot about the fax machine, and we also had a printer in the room too. So it really was a complete one-stop shop business center and amusement center. And also we were the only hotel in Hong Kong that had the airline arrivals and the departures in the gates. It was a live feed from the airport. Still unique, right? Thanks. Hanky, what about you? What's your take on what's coming, what's next?
Yeah. Hi, Meryl. Good afternoon. I hope I'm not lagging because I'm looking at my screen, and
I see myself a bit lagging. Am I lagging?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, you're clear.
Okay. Okay. So first of all, Meryl, thank you again for inviting me. It's such an honor always to be invited to your events, right? So the way I'm looking at the Henry Hotels are a Philippine-centric brand, right? We call ourselves the pioneering boutique hotel brand in the Philippines, right? And the way we look at this is, if I may cut it, it's two ways, right? So there are business hotels and there are leisure hotels, right? This pandemic really has shown that in terms of business, that it has forever changed. COVID has forever changed the business hotel landscape. I think that because of the advent also of technology like this, imagine we're on Zoom. I'm here in Manila. Fraser is in. Fraser, where are you? Are you in Hong Kong?
Hong Kong.
Hong Kong, right? And you guys are in Cebu, right? So with the advent of this technology, even the other speakers like Hannah, I'm sure they're everywhere, right? So if we had to have that conference in Cebu, we would have to fly in, right? So and we would stay in the waterfront, right? But now we're not. We're just here in our own little offices and sharing with you. So for me, the business hotels have forever been affected by the advent of technology, right? So my feeling is, in terms of if you were to patronize business hotels, it's really for the important relationships really that you have to fly in. But for those meetings that are in between that, it's just conducted via Zoom. That's for business hotels. For leisure, on the other hand, for me, that's a different story, because leisure, there you cannot experience the culture, the touch and feel of the sand, or the waft of the grass, or the waft of a forest, the smell of a forest via Zoom, unless they do that, unless they're able to invent that, right? And it's really different to be able to talk to the vendor or to the tour guide, who's leading you into these sites or into these places, right? So it's very different. For me, leisure actually will be stronger, because now, we have Zoom. We're just here in our own offices, in our own places, in our own homes, right? But every now and then, we would still love to travel. We would still love to experience things, right? And that's why for me, the way to go is really leisure rather than business, right? And in terms of the leisure hotels, I would think coming out of the pandemic, it's these smallish, intimate resorts that are the ones that are paving the way or leading the way, because again, COVID is psychological, right? We want to be in a space where it's kind of controlled, where we all know who's there, right? And it's the intimate size of these smaller leisure properties that will lead the way.
If I could, Hanky, if I could just jump in here.
Sure, Fraser.
It's the one thing I notice is the business traveller spends one night or two nights, and really it's an in and out business. He couldn't care less whether it was pink walls or blue walls. But a leisure traveller is looking for much more. When they walk in, they're looking for an experience. And in the Philippines, you guys are pretty good at that. It's about, making them feel relaxed and warm and invited. And it's not about surrounding a lot of technology, frankly. It's, when you watch a woman and walking into a room, the wife walking into the room, she's not sitting and admiring the light switch, but she's looking at the view out the window or the colour of the fittings and the cleanliness of the room. And I think, to your point, that's exactly right. That's where the effort's got to go.
So I guess it'd be safe to say that we don't look for the ATM experience in your resorts. So very much of a people touch, high touch, intimacy, and small and really no traffic other than people that you know. But Hanky, talk also about creating the brand. I mean, what led you decide to, years ago, to create Henry and then stick with it? Because it wasn't an immediate, it wasn't an immediate takeoff. It took you a couple of years too, right?
Well, Meryl, well, not yet done, right? We're still, our big, hairy, audacious goal is to have properties all over the Philippines, right? So, it's a two-part question. That how did it lead me to go into hospitality?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I was a co-founder of this pizza chain called Yellow Cab Pizza Company, right? We founded that in 1999, and what I did there was basically business development. I went all over the country and tried to look for locations for our sites, for our stores, right? And it led me to two things. First, the Philippines is such a beautiful country, right? Because we are archipelagic, different islands, one island to the other, the culture is different from one island to the other, right? And then the second is I'm an entrepreneur, right? So there's such an opportunity for business hotels. Sorry, for hospitality in general, for hotels in general, right? Not just business hotels. Because there's, in every location that I would go to, of course, I would try to stay in the more upscale properties, right? And when you look at them, it's really, oh my gosh, we can do, as a nation, as a Filipino, we can do so much more. And since a lot of us, the listeners here, the ones in the audience here are all Filipinos, right? So every time I travel in these business hotels, a lot of times I go home with the pasalubong, or what we call, Fraser, like souvenirs, right? And it's an unfortunate souvenir sometimes, because they're usually what we call surut, or bed bugs, right? So those are the souvenirs I take home. Like, I realized that these bed bugs bite in a certain particular area, like in 3 of them, right? Because they come back to us during the night. And that really led me into hospitality. Once I had the opportunity, we sold the brand. After selling the brand, I had the opportunity to get into hospitality, and there I jumped in. Why am I still at it? It's because of the first reason, Meryl. You're in Cebu now. Cebu is beautiful. So many, Cebu Island itself. There's, aside from Mactan, right? There's, right across it is Olango Island. The Cebuanos will resonate with that. There's even the Camotes Islands that's not yet really developed. To the north, there's Bantayan and Malapascua, and to the south, there's Mualboal, right? Imagine, if we had to have our way, we'd have 5-6 resorts in Cebu Island alone, right? And it's really the beauty of our country, from dive spots to forests to beaches that's the hardware. We were talking about that in the previous question, right, Fraser? The hardware, right? So, we have the hardware, which is the hotels, but the software for me, which is our people, which is our different locations, that's the beauty of the Philippines. That's why, even in the toughest of times, I'm still at it. I'm still at it.
Well, I think wherever you go, you'll find Filipinos running hotels, basically.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. But I must say that a business hotel is not the same for me as what it used to be. And to go and stay in a Philippine hotel and have reasonable service and a smiling face is more important to me than having a Rolls Royce at the door. It's more important. And I don't care about the cost. But I do need to know, and you don't want me to tell you that, of course, but I do need to know that the people are interested in what I'm doing and they're part of what I'm doing. That's the one thing I enjoy in the Philippines.
Yeah. I think it was touched on earlier with some of the...
Sorry.
It was touched on earlier by one of the other speakers that there is a labor shortage. I mean, Philippines this year as compared to 2019, there's 42% less manpower, right? So it comes down to really that for the capacity increasing, number of hotels and restaurants, there's simply not enough staff. But I think more than the staffing issue in quantity, is going to come down to the quality of staff. Fraser, to your point about friendly, knowledgeable as well, and Hanky, people that deliver the experience. So where do we find these people, and who's training them?
Hong Kong. I really don't know. I just find everywhere I go, the Filipino people are in charge, and it goes very well. Maybe you just got to pay them more.
I think that's sort of coming. So, yeah.
But Hanky, I don't know. I'm sure this is a problem for you more than anything. But
actually, the other hotels might have problems, Meryl, but on our end, actually, we have a lot of for the new properties that we're opening soon, which is Coron and Boracay. We actually don't have a problem in staffing. I think what COVID has done is given us, our brand has actually shown through in these times, right? Because what we have is a clarity. I mean, the brand clarity. I'm a brand. Meryl, you know me. I'm a brand guy, right? So I think what we have is brand clarity, and we know who we are and what we stand for, right? And actually, yes, we've lost a couple of my mancom during the pandemic, right? But we were able to take in actually high caliber people from actually, Shangri-La that are joining us as operations director and HR corporate, right? And in the Philippines, that's the training ground is Shangri-La, right? I think we all know that. They are the luxury brand here in the Philippines, mid-lux, and then that's a training ground of a lot of hoteliers, right? And we've been lucky. So we've been blessed. And then for the rank and file for the staff, we like to get we call diamonds in the rough. So these are young ones like 22, 23, 24. That are just right out of college. A little bit of experience. And what we do is we polish them, right? We try to inculcate or ingrain in them the values of the brand. And so far so good. So far I'm happy with what we've been doing. So that's why we haven't had really that big of a challenge in terms of staffing.
And actually,
pretty much Dahil Sayel, isn't it?
It's because of Hanky. Hanky, how many properties do you now have under development and open?
So right now we have 5 properties that are open. So and then we have 3 properties that are under development. So that's Coron, that's Boracay, and then in a couple of years' time, San Vicente in Palawan.
I think you'd be probably the first branded one in San Vicente, right?
No. There's another brand that's opening 100-room property there. So it won't be us.
Well, variety is good.
Exactly. I welcome competition, right? It keeps everybody on their toes.
And it also brings more traffic in.
Meryl,
right?
just go.
Yeah, go ahead, Fraser. Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. Just going back to your point, the sort of things we're doing in hotels now is providing facilities that will reduce the amount of or the demand on labour And for an example, we have a means now of detecting when somebody pushes the room service out to the corridor, so somebody will come up and collect it and get rid of it rather than letting it sitting there all day. We know now when the guest is in the room, so we won't send somebody to clean or service the room. It's these sort of things which I think will make a difference to Hanky and his hotels, because it's such an issue. The other one was just listening to your previous speaker on air conditioning. We now have the ability to control the air conditioning depending on whether the guest is in the room or not, and try and reduce the cost of the chiller operation. So everybody's looking at it. My friends at Hyatt and at Marriott are very much involved in reducing costs, and I'm sure it's the same in the Philippines as well. So it's a different view. Before we'd handle you a bouquet of flowers as you walked in the door, but now we're smiling and trying to get you to the room as quickly as possible. That's the main thing.
That's true. Okay. Okay. Let's open up some questions from the audience. Question? Yes.
Actually, Fraser, I mean, you are a good legend in, IT. That's what Mariel's saying, right? But, hearing you talk, it's like, it's an experience. It's a software rather than the hardware.
Very much so. It's listening to other people and listening to people like Merrill, who will give input. It's not about trying to build another box to do something. In fact, we're trying to reduce the number of boxes. But it's trying to just provide for the guests so we can keep enhancing the experience. But the one thing we learn is that the guests that you have today will have a different requirement in a year's time, and we need to be able to handle that rolling over. It doesn't stop, it goes all the time. We're spoiled. And people like you are on the treadmill, I'm afraid.
It's always about the experience.
Yeah. Good morning. Hanky mentioned earlier that the Philippines, Cebu especially, has actually this diverse culture. Now my question is, what are your considerations in branding or in brand development, especially when considering markets with different or diverse culture?
So what I would answer that, one of our brand pillars of the brand is, one of the brand pillars of the Henry Hotel is actually sense of place. Right? So it's really understanding, that Cebu, like wherever you are, that's why if you look at the photo in the back, that's our Dumaguete property, right? So this one was an old resort, which we renovated, right? So very important to us is sense of place. So character and soul. It's understanding that, if you are in Cebu, if you are in, let's say, what is the nature, what is around you, diba? What does the community espouse? What is it like, right? And it's really being there, being local, having character and soul. That is very local. Sense of place, I call it.
Yeah, I think you're right, Hanky. The other thing is now, instead of spending a lot of money on American television, we're providing television in the languages of the guests. So the Chinese can stay and they can watch some Chinese programming as much as the Japanese can, or the Koreans, or anybody. And we find that what we're messaging to them is the fact that we're aware of them and that we're trying to help them enjoy their stay. And that's going on as well, I know, in the Philippines particularly. So it's a matter of growing that business. And it doesn't cost you anything. You get rid of all the expensive carriers.
And to add to what Fraser is saying, right? Because we provide an experience, right? So, when you go to Cebu, you guys Cebuanos are very proud. I'm also, I'm a proud Filipino, but Cebuanos are very proud. In my hotels, in my property, I don't want to showcase Bacolod, right, or Iloilo, because why? Why will I? Or even Bali, why, right? Or even Phuket, why? I will showcase. And actually, we're very lucky that our new Department of Tourism Secretary is actually from Cebu, from Liloan, right? So, and she already mentioned that she will highlight, the Visayas region, right? Because the Visayas is really truly beautiful.
I think it's interesting that you're doing this, Nanki, because you're probably doing it more than most others. Mm. And it's really where it's going. It's a home away from home, and you're creating it. Yep. Good luck to you. I think it's very good.
Yeah. Thank you. Wow. Thank you very much, Fraser. That's an honor.
No, it's true. I think it comes that a bit with you and Fraser, certainly, that the experience you create is because it's the experience that comes from you, your soul, as you said, it's what you feel, and that comes across in the physical and in the software of the people, right? I think that sometimes is where you can really see, if you stay in a sense of place, right? You can stay in I travel to the country too. You can stay in some hotels and you could be anywhere in the world, or you don't know where you are when you wake up, right? Because it's so commoditized. And I think that it's nice in this day and age that there's still room for something that's special, experiential, something that is a thought that gets translated into the physical and into the software the people experience, right? But it comes from heart. I mean, whether it's Peninsula or Henry Hotels, right? And I think there is a market for that, right?
No, you're right, Errol. It's about the guest, and that's not a whole lot of technology that gets you there. It's in the Philippines. It's learning to smile at the guest, and the Filipinos do that very well, and make them feel welcome. It doesn't matter how much money it is; just make them feel welcome. Have fun.
At Concepcion Carrier, one of my team conceptualized the fact of taking the call center. Call centers are always based on trying to limit the amount of minutes it spends with each call, right? Well, we take a different approach where we're saying we actually own the guest for X amount of minutes. So let's not worry about shortening it. Let's just spend more time in making sure that we get to know them and we get to provide them the solution, and we provide them that experience they don't get anywhere else by making a telephone call, right? So, and it was actually sort of funny because the call center operators are so not used to that. I mean, their productivity is based on, the shorter amount of call handling minutes, the better. But we're the only company that said, no, we're not interested in that. What we want is the experience delivered within that amount of minutes. So.
I think you're right, Merrill. Mm.
Questions? No? Okay. Well, good. Okay. Now, where do you, since we all believe that there's a sense of place for the resorts, so what's the prognosis for city hotels? With the preponderance of a lot of brands that look alike, sound alike, serve alike. So what's the prognosis for that?
I don't think it changes that much anymore, Merrill, to be honest with you. I think that it's about service. Yeah. And it's providing for the guests when they're staying with you. If I'm staying in Manila, I want to be near a nice restaurant, or I want to be able to go and do some shopping. Mm-hmm. But again, I don't need a Rolls Royce to do it. I keep coming back to the Rolls Royce because it was a thing of the past, but it's no longer relevant. Mm. The Ferrari's much better. Anyway.
Okay. Hanky, what do you think? where do you send people? I mean, your property in Pasay is so unique, but then for the city business hotels, I mean, do you have a particular favorite that you send people to or you frequent?
To stay, well, of course, really, it's our property, right? But good question. For meals, I go to this because it's a quiet place in Makati, right? It's in the Raffles. It's a nice place to have lunch because actually there's no people that much people there, so it's nice to have a conversation. Mireo restaurant for me, so that's one of the places I go to for a meal, right? But of course, if it's for hotel, of course I house them in my own.
Goes without saying, yeah. What I found interesting during COVID actually was that there was a market dying to go for the better kind of restaurants. Like, so Blackbird in Makati did phenomenally well. Wildflower did very well because they basically told everybody we're open most of the week. It's funny that not many people really focused on the high end, but that's where the money was, actually. Right? So that was one of the more interesting takes. Here in Cebu, usually I'll go to Pig and Palm, right? And they're jamming. I mean, those guys are, you could be in Hong Kong with the kind of service that you get there because it's completely polished. So, I think that there is a market that would appreciate, regardless of price, obviously, that kind of seamless service that these guys have, right? So that's why, being a stickler for the customer experience, it's really how do we inculcate that understanding to the staff so that they can turn it on, right? Anyway, just a point. So.
I think, Merrill, it's the Filipinos' friendliness is the big thing. Wherever I go, they smile at me. And I'm an old man, so I appreciate that.
Okay. Okay. Yes.
Okay. So since we were talking about branding and then your business is into hotels and since we experienced pandemic, so I want to know your advertising touch, especially during the pandemic. It's a great big challenge for business sectors. What are the most important factors also in advertising your promotions or your brand itself? Can you also share some insights? Yes, especially on the advertising factors during the pandemic until now.
So probably and thank you for your question. Probably I'd answered it to two things. No, so the first thing is, in the pandemic, we realized that no amount of marketing will help us, right? Because the markets have imploded and our occupancies have become zero, right? It's understanding now. We try to understand who our target market was now, right? At that point in time, because leisure travelers were gone, borders were shut, right? And there's also no business traveler, right? So my first answer there is understanding your market. Who do you serve? So we understood that we were serving now, quarantine, and it was really when we understood who our market was in terms of quarantine, then we went after those markets, right? But it was not through advertising. It was really, going to OWA, Overseas Welfare Workers Administration, these government agencies that could provide us the business, right? But as we went along, of course, knowing your market is the first one, right? And then second is, everything that has the usual way of putting your brand out is now turned on its head, right? Before, we rely in terms of reputation management. We relied heavily on TripAdvisor, right? We ensured that we were always certificate of excellence, Hall of Fame. We'd reply to all our guests, right? And now imagine in 2 years' time, I don't know, like Fraser or Mero, for me, TripAdvisor has become irrelevant. Now it's Google, right?
Yeah,
it's Google, and that's the way to go for me. Moving towards the future, it's working with Google, right? And not only that, working with and again, understanding your target market, right? So our target market right now is Filipinos, right? And as Filipinos, where do we spend most of our time in? Facebook and Instagram, right? And it's using those platforms, those social media platforms, to get your brand out.
That's right. Yeah. To that point, Hanky, a friend of mine in Makati, he does the weekend markets, both Salcedo and Legazpi Village. He does French food. During COVID, he did very well because what he did is he always kept a database of his customers. So based on the database, he was able to offer set meals, deliver meals, whatever. So he was able to survive and actually flourish during COVID because he had always done the right thing early. He knew his market, he had an active database, and he reached out to that database even before COVID. So that's what sustained him over time. So it's exactly what you said, knowing your market, right? So let's take a last questions. No? Okay. Well, that's it. Okay. Well, Fraser, Hanky, thank you both very much for your time. And let's give them a round of applause, please. And Hanky, congratulations on winning the prestigious awards and notice from TNL, Travel and Leisure. So, well done.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Fraser, take care in Hong Kong, and Hanky in Manila, take care. Thank you both very much. God bless. See you.
Thanks, Mero. Grateful. Nice meeting you, Fraser, online. Nice meeting you.
Thanks, Hanky.
And with that, it comes to close. Are there any questions anybody would like to ask before we close? Okay. I think some of my own notes from the various wise speakers is that I think that being back in our country for 15 years, right? I think that when you compare us against our twin competitor, Thailand, right? When I got back, I said, why does Thailand always get so many foreign visitors, right? So what I did is I Googled how many rainy days in Thailand and how many rainy days in the Philippines, and they're the same. But for some reason, Europeans think it doesn't rain in Thailand. But when they think of the Philippines, they think of typhoons, right? So it can't be that. But I think on the point is that it was touched on by some of the speakers, right? Capacity is one thing, quality is the other, right? We cannot be known as the cheapest destination in Asia with cheap accommodations and restaurants to match. That is simply not sustainable. It's really actually pretty stupid, right? So that's one, the quality of facilities. And then the other thing is we have definitely very friendly, we have the hospitality advantage in people, but also we need to gear up the quality of training. You can't smile at people because they're not getting service, right? You can't smile at people and say sorry 10 times because you can't give them what they want, right? So I think the burden of responsibility is on the owners, the decision makers, the operators, to ensure that there is a complete emphasis on quality of training. right? How many times do you hear friends of yours in the same industry saying, well, why train them because they'll only leave? I mean, so that's good. So let's keep them stupid so nobody will hire them, right? I mean, that would be the logical assumption, right? But you can't. You have to train them, right? And expect to lose them, so you're always going to be recruiting, right? Okay, you know, so it's one of those things. So I think that to your point about the government, what they should do is, I think, having been in the private sector forever, we sort of don't rely on the government. Whatever they do is a bonus. The key is you need to know your markets, know how to reach your markets. You need to make sure you take care of the guests that are staying in your hotel now, word of mouth, to come back again, right? It's sort of the old-fashioned way, right? Digital is only a tool, right? Now, I mean, as a friend of mine at the Penn would say, everybody gets 5 minutes, right? How are you going to impress the guest in 5 minutes, right? And if not, then there's somebody else that's going to try and impress them in 5 minutes, right? So it comes down to old-fashioned quality, design of experience given by people that love to serve, that know how to serve, and are consistent at knowing how to serve and giving the experience, right? And on that note, thank you all for your time. Thank you very much, and we'll see you. God bless.